Hey, welcome back to Blender Gunpla. I'm Mark, and today we're going to finally finish up this piece that we've been working on for the last couple of episodes in the series. This is actually the printed version of what we came up with after episode 1 of this mini-series. So there's been more changes since then, but I didn't print the second version of this piece. So here's what we've got. It fits here onto this high-grade Zaku shield, and it fits nicely. You know, we'll glue it down once we're finished. Last episode we actually added a little bit of extra structural big detail down here, and we added a logo into this Insignia plate right here. And today the plan is to add some other final sort of fine details, smaller things, just to finish out the part to make it look like a completed part. And then I think at the end of that we'll print this thing out. I'll probably put a coat of primer on it just so we can see what the final thing ends up looking like. But before we get into that, I wanted to take a quick minute at the start of this video and just say thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed and followed along and reached out to me on social media or in the comments with questions or just encouragement. When I started this series, I wasn't really quite sure what to expect. But just in the last couple of days, I've passed 300 subscribers on the YouTube channel. I know that's probably doesn't seem like very much in the scope of YouTube. I know many people have many more subscribers than that. But for me, it's a big deal because I wasn't really sure what I was expecting when I started this thing out. So thank you again to you guys that have subscribed and followed along and encouraged me along the way. I will keep making these videos as long as you guys want them. So I've already got a long list from comments and questions that people have asked of other topics to cover as we move forward here. So if you've got other suggestions, please leave them in the comments down below, and I'll add to the list and maybe rearrange the list depending on what you guys want to see next. So with that said, let's get started with today's topic, which is finishing up this part right here. I'm going to fire up Blender and I will see you after the intro. Let's go. All right, so here we are with our file loaded in the state that I believe we left it last time. I haven't touched this file in a little while we've been waiting between episodes here, but this is where we left it, and the plan for today is to add some of the final sort of fine details to make this thing look like a completed part, so that maybe we fill in some of the larger empty spaces with a little bit of detail. And I want to say two things about that before we get started. First of all, I always try when I'm adding detail, either in a modeling situation like this in Blender, or even if I'm actually working with a physical part, you know, maybe doing some scribing or some other detail type work on an existing part. I always try to make sure that the detail I add looks like it could have some sort of mechanical functionality to it, right? Rather than just adding detail for the sake of decoration, I want to add something that looks like an access hatch or a bolt that's holding things together, or you know, that kind of thing, so that all of the detail looks like it has a purpose for being there. And so we'll keep that in mind as we work here. And then the second thing that pertains specifically to modeling in Blender that I always find is a problem for me, and I don't know if it will be for you, but I'll mention it here because it catches me a lot, is that because in Blender we can really zoom in on an area, right? So we could go look at this very closely. I often forget when I'm in a mode like this, zoomed way in, the scale of this piece, right? So this whole thing is really only like 0.5 millimeter all the way across. And so, you know, that if I forget about that, I add details that are way too fine, even for printing on a really nice resin printer. If you have, you know, the highest resolution printer you can find, a lot of times you can very easily get into a mode where you're adding detail here in Blender that is just so small that even a good resin printer is not going to reproduce it well. And then you get your printed part and you wonder, where did all of the fine detail go? Well, you probably made it too small. So my rule of thumb is to try to make most of the details that I add about twice as big as I think they need to be. And then when I print them and hold the part in my hand, I find that they're just about the right size. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go as well. And with that, let's go up here to the Insignia plate area and try to start working on something up here. I want to add some kind of bolt details here in the corner, 4 of them. they're going to be kind of in the way of this V-fin thing on our Insignia as well up here. The other thing with this Insignia, in light of what I just said about details being too small, I have a feeling that the width of these lines that we've carved here for the Insignia are probably a bit too small, especially up here at the points of the V-fin, and they're not going to print well. And so we're probably going to change this logo a little bit to make it a little more beefy. Since it's my own logo, I don't mind mangling it a little. I'm probably going to cut these points off of the V-fin and make it just a little bit thicker, all these lines all the way around. So we'll do that in a minute, but first let's work on these bolt details in the corners here. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to add a flat disc using ND's recon poly function. But before we do that, let's talk about the 3D cursor, because it normally sits down here. It's this little object that you see that's sitting at the origin of the world. So it sits at 0, 0, 0 by default. We can move it around. I don't think we've ever done that before in one of these videos in this series, and so that's why I wanted to mention it here before we actually do it. When you create a new object in Blender, whether it's a cube or a cylinder or whatever, or these ND vertices and recon poly like we're about to do, it always creates it centered at your 3D cursor. And the easiest way to move that thing around is to hold down Shift and right click. And so if I do that, if I hold down Shift and I right click here, you'll see that Blender's actually smart enough as well to move the 3D cursor flush onto the surface of the object that we clicked on. So if I click here, for example, now it's on this surface over here, or I can put it on this surface over here. So that's a nice way to get your 3D cursor moved into a spot where you want it to be. Now, having said that, I'm going to look straight down on this, and I'm going to reposition this one more time right about there, because I'm imagining a circle sitting here and I want it to, be centered around this corner basically. And so now with our 3D cursor there, I'm going to hit the F key to open up ND's fast menu, and I'm going to choose Recon Poly. What this does is it gives us a tool that lets us set the radius of a polygon and then the number of segments. And so if we set the number of segments to some very high number, then we end up with something that is very close to a circle. And because it's an ND tool, like all the others, we can type in numbers as well. So if I want an exact number for this radius, which I do, I think I want it to be about 600. Which is 0.6 of a millimeter. I can type that in exactly, and then I can hold down Alt to change the number of segments, and I'm rolling up my mouse wheel until I get to, I don't know, maybe about 24 segments. That seems good enough. And I'm going to hit Enter to lock that in. So now I end up with this flat filled in disc that's sitting here on the surface of my part. And I can hit F to open the fast menu and choose Solidify and give that some thickness. I'm just going to eyeball this, the exact thickness. Again, you could type a number, but for me that seems about right. And so then I'm going to, with that object selected, hold down Shift and select this, the main object itself, because we're going to cut this out. I'm going to open my fast menu and I'm going to choose Difference. And I'm going to hit the H key to hide this wireframe that shows up. So now we have this cutout here, and we'll put another cylinder inside of that. That's another reason for moving the 3D cursor here, because now if we make another smaller cylinder, we know that it's going to be concentric with the one that we just used to cut that hole out there. So yeah, before we do that, let's actually go over to the modifier stack. And I think we talked about this last time. Because of the order of these modifiers, this difference is happening and cutting this cylinder out of here before the bevel modifier that's rounding all the edges of the main part. And in this case, I want that to be a sharp edge. And so I'm going to grab this modifier and I'm going to move it down to the bottom of the stack. And then that gives us a nice sharp edge here instead of the beveled edge for our cutout. And now, given that that's done, let's go ahead and hit the F key again and do Recon Poly and create a second circle inside of here. I think I made that other one 600, right? So we'll say about 400 for this one. And we'll again hold down Alt and roll up the number of segments again to 24. So it's just the same as what we did before. And we'll hit Enter to lock that in. And so now we have this disc floating in the air in the middle of the hole we cut out. And we can hit the F key and solidify it. So we're doing the same thing again. I'm going to make this nice and thick. We'll probably move it downward in a minute so that it's more flush with the top edge of this. But the other thing I want to do to this one is hit F, open the ND menu again and choose Bevel. and this will bevel this edge just a little bit in like that. So you see how that looks? A little bit more like a bolt or rivet or that sort of thing. It also did the bottom edge of that, but we don't care because that's going to be down inside of the part anyway. So I'm going to move in the Z-axis and push this down into this space. I think I want it protruding just a little bit above the top edge there, so I'm going to move it down just a little bit more so it's kind of sticking up just like that, and that looks pretty good. So yeah, now we just have to replicate this to the four corners, and we can use an array modifier to do that. But if we want to replicate the hole, the first thing we have to do is select that cylinder object that we used to cut out that hole, and that's a little tricky to do, right? Because you can go over here to your scene collection and you can try to scroll down in these utilities and figure out which one it is. But ND actually has a different, better way to do that, in my opinion. You select the object that you've cut that out of, and you hit the F key and you choose cycle. And now I can roll my mouse and we can see all of the different utility objects that we've used to either add or subtract things from the object that we had selected. So this cylinder here is what we want, and I can hit enter or left click when I get to that, and it leaves that object selected. So now I can do things to this cylinder that I used as a cutter here. And the thing I want to do is, again, looking straight down from above so we get this lined up just right. I will hit the F key, and I was going to choose array, but ND has not predicted with its fast menu that I want to, it doesn't think that I want to have array as an option there. So I'm going to have to hit Shift 2 and pull up the entire ND menu. Look, there's an update available. I will install that before the next time that we record an episode, and I'll let you know if there's anything useful and new that's in that update as well. So under replicate here, we can choose array, and we will roll up the mouse cursor or the mouse wheel one time to get a second one of those circles in our X direction, and we'll hold down Control and we'll just drag the mouse this way. I dragged it a little too far. I've lost track of it. There it is. Dragging it over this way until we get it to about there. We accidentally increased our count, so I only want 2 of those. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit enter. I should not have hit enter because I want that modifier or that array modifier back, so I'll hit F and pull it up again because I need to also hit the A key to switch to the Y axis and do a second one there as well. So I'm going to change that count to 2. I'm going to hold down Control and drag the mouse and pull those up. And I'm just eyeballing the exact location of all of these to get them fairly close. You could do all kinds of math based on the millimeters of your diameter of your circles and knowing how wide this insignia plate is and get them perfectly centered. But for me, this is close enough. And so I will click there. And you'll see that because we've done this to the object that was already being used as a difference to cut this out, those things are already cut out up there. In those two new locations, and they are interacting with this insignia, this logo, in a slightly weird way, but we'll take care of that in a minute. The other thing I want to do is select this guy and do the same sort of array modifier to this to fit it inside of those circles as well. And so let's hit Shift 2 and go to replicate an array. And in the X direction, we will hold down Control and drag this over until we get, because of my small screen here, for the video purposes, this is when I drag the mouse cursor off the screen, it's jumping weirdly. So that probably won't happen for you. And then I will hit A to switch to the Y axis and roll up a second one of those and hold down Control and drag this over. Yeah, again, we got that weird jump when I cycled off my screen. So we'll drop those right about there. All right, so now that is pretty good. Those are a little high actually. And so we can actually go back in here and adjust our array modifier on the Y axis and hold down Control and pull those down just a little bit so they're centered correctly. There we go. All right, and now we need to do something about this logo. Like I said, I believe that the lines themselves are a little bit too narrow, that this isn't going to print well. So I'd like to make it a little chunkier, but also it's too wide, this V-fin section at the top of it. And so we're going to take care of both of those things. We need to select the logo first. So I'm going to select the object that it's being cut out of, and I'm going to use that cycle trick again to choose to cycle through and find the object we want. And so now I've got that selected. So let's look straight from the top again, just so that I can keep this mostly centered. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it. So we'll scale it up like this, which is obviously going to make it way too big. And I will move it back into here. So something like that seems fine. That's probably a little too big, actually. Let's scale it down just a touch and move it this way. All right, that's good. And then I could go into edit mode and just grab these vertices up here and pull them down this way, and these and pull them down this way. That's not going to do exactly what I want though, because it will still, the end of this will still be very narrow. I'd rather just slice it off, like right here and right about here somewhere. And so in order to do that, I think the easiest thing to do is just to hit Shift A and add a cube. So we've got a cube here now. And yeah, we'll just scale this cube up. I'm going to hit Alt Z so we can kind of see through it and see how this is all working. So I'm going to just scale and move this cube until I get it in a spot that I think is good for how I want to cut these parts of the V-fin off. So I want it to be a little bit smaller like that, and I want to make sure it's kind of centered. Yeah, this is good. So it's definitely, the cube is definitely above and below this logo as well. So now with that selected, and then we can shift select the logo, we can actually do an intersection operation here. So we're just keeping the parts of this logo that are inside of the cube. So I'll hit F and I'll choose intersect. Now we're only keeping the parts of the logo inside the cube. I'm gonna hit H to hide the wireframe that's left over from the cube, and I'll hit Alt Z again to make this solid. And now we have this, which is still a little bit close there. So again, we'll go do my cycle trick and go grab that logo, and I'm gonna move it in the Y direction, just down a touch. Maybe I'll just scale it. Yeah, let's do that. Let's look at the top view again. We'll scale it just a little bit smaller, and then we'll move it and just eyeball it and center it within this area. All right, that is pretty good. Now we'll hide that wireframe. So there is our Insignia plate, I think finished, and that should print a lot better. It doesn't have exactly the logo as it should be, but again, I'm okay with modifying the logo because it's my logo anyway. So yeah, there we go with that. What do we want to do next? Well, I think I want to do something with these bits here. Now we added this last time, and if you remember, this is actually just a cylinder. I'll tab in so we can see the points here. It's a single cylinder that's kind of squished on the Z-axis, so it's an oval on the end here, and then it's replicated up that way with an array modifier. And what I'd like to do is add some sort of an indented cut, probably not centered on this, but somewhere along here down the side of these things. And so the way I'm going to do that is, we'll zoom in so you can see this much closer. I'm going to hit Control R, which allows me to add a loop cut into this object that I have selected. And you can move the mouse around to choose whether you want your loop cut to go horizontal or vertical. In this case, I want it to go this way around the cylinder. So I'm going to click now, and then it lets me slide this to one side or the other to position it exactly where I want it before I click a second time to lock it in. So I'm going to put it right about here, I think, and go ahead and lock it in. Now I'm in edit mode here, and I'm seeing all the individual vertices. So I'm going to hit 2 to switch to edge mode, so we're just seeing the edges highlighted instead of all the vertices, because that's easier to look at. And now we can see we have that new edge selected that we created. I can hit Control B, which is Blender's hotkey for beveling. And if you bevel a selected edge like this, you can actually just add thickness to it and make it into like basically 2 edges. So I'm going to add about that much thickness. So this is the part that I want to be inset, to drop down below the edge of this cylinder. And the way you can do that is with the I key. So with that selected, I'm going to hit I, And if you look at the top of the screen right below my menu bar, there's a bunch of additional hotkeys now that I'm in this inset mode that I can press, because if I just move the mouse, this isn't doing what I have in mind. But there's a reminder up there in that little tooltip up at the top below my menu bar that says I can hold down Control to edit the depth instead of the width of this thing. So if I hold down Control and then I start to move my mouse, this is the inset, the idea of the inset that I was after. I want to make these drop down below that level. I could also outset them like this, and obviously because of the way our array modifier works, that spreads them out in a very strange way. So, but this is what I'm after, something like this, and that's good. So I'm gonna click to lock that in. And now we have that kind of a detail on there, which I like quite a lot. I don't like this area down here now because it doesn't really go with what we've done there. So I would actually like to undo some of this work we did last time to try to add some detail here. So I believe that, let's tab out of that edit mode. I believe that, yeah, this was a separate cylinder. We can just hit X and choose to delete it. And then this was a cylinder that we cut out of this other object. So I can use that cycle trick again. So I'm gonna hit F and go cycle, and that's the object I'm after. So I'll click, and I can also delete this one. So now we're back to just having this shape here that we had before. And I like that better. I would like to add some sort of maybe just a little rectangular cutout right here, just to add a little bit of detail. So I'm going to hold down Shift and right click to move my 3D cursor to about right there. And I'm going to use the ND fast menu to create a single vertex. Now I can extrude this thing to make the rectangular shape that I'm after. So I'm going to hit E for extrude. I'm going to hit X to extrude along the X axis. I'm going to go, I don't know, about that far out. And then I'm going to hit E again, extrude along the Y axis down to maybe here. And now I want to extrude along the X axis back this way, but I want it to line up vertically with this one so that, you know, I'm making a perfect rectangle. And that's a little tricky to do unless I'm going to hit Escape to cancel out of that extrude operation. If you go up here to the top of the screen where the snapping tool is, you can tell it to snap to a vertex. So I'm going to change this from snap to increment, which is grid increments, to snap to vertex. And now you'll see if I hit E for extrude and I choose the X axis, so I'm extruding this way, I can hold down Control, which is the snapping key, and I can move my mouse over the top of this vertex. And so now it is going to snap that movement to the X position of that vertex. So now I know that I've got a perfect rectangular shape here. I can hit F again and say make manifold, which will fill that in. It'll put that last edge on there and fill that in. So now I have a flat rectangular plane that I've created right on top of that surface, and I can tab out of edit mode back to object mode and hit F and solidify and add some thickness to this thing, and then hold down Shift and select the object that I want to cut it out of and hit F and hit difference, and then hit H to hide the wireframe that's left over. And there we have a nice little detail cut out, and that goes, I think, a lot better with what we did there than that weird round thing that we had before. So I am happy with that. So at this point, I think we're about halfway done with the modifications I had in mind. We created these little bolt details up here. We also changed the way this logo fits on here. And then we've kind of finished this area of the part down here to a state that I'm happy with. The next thing I want to do is over here on this side. So we've got this area here, and this wraps around to the back side of the shield. And I think I want to add some kind of an access panel looking thing here. So add some panel lines around a rectangular area that will look like it's meant to be some kind of an access panel. So I'm going to look straight from the side here, and I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hit Alt-Z to make this partially transparent, because I think I can use this grid as a way to eyeball the centering and symmetry of this thing. Yeah, that'll work, I think. So I'm going to start right about here, and I'm going to go right over to here with this line and then straight down to make this panel. And I'm going to hold down Shift and right click right where I want that thing to start to set my 3D cursor there. And I'm going to hit the F key and create a single vertex. So now I have a vertex that's flush with the surface of that piece. and I can extrude it around and make the shape that I'm after. So I'm going to extrude this, and I want to constrain it in the Y direction, and I want to pull it out to right about there because I can tell by the grid that that will make it centered. And so I will click there. I want to extrude on the Z axis down this way. Now here, I just want to make sure I go beyond the edge of the part because we're going to use this to make a panel line that we're cutting out. And so anything down below here is not going to be visible anyway, but I definitely want to be down below the edge of the part. So I'm just going to click down here somewhere. Then I'm going to extrude back along the Y-axis this way. And I'm going to use that same trick that I did before of holding down Control while hovering over this point to lock that in so that it's in the Y direction, it's gone the right amount so that it's perfectly lined up with that. And now instead of doing the make manifold thing that I would normally do here, because that it fills up this edge, or it creates this edge, but it also fills up the face. I don't want a face here, I just want a rectangular border with no face in between. So I'm going to instead just extrude this along the Z axis back up this way, hold down Control and lock it to that point. So now I have an empty rectangle of just edges with no face in between. And I will tab out of edit mode back into object mode so I can just see that square there, and I will hit the F key to open ND's menu, and I will choose Profile Extrude. This is by default chosen the X-axis, which is what we need. And so what we're doing is we're just making this have some thickness so that it'll go down into our part. This is how deep our panel line will go. And I think I'm going to leave it at right there at about 1,000. So because it's extruded, or because it's expanding in both directions above and below that surface, that'll be a 500 or a 0.5 millimeter of depth to this panel line, which I think seems good. So I'm going to click there to lock that in. Now we have an infinitely thin line that we've created, so we need to add some thickness to it. I'm going to hit Alt-Z to turn off the see-through look so that we can hopefully see this a little bit better as I do this. And I'm going to hit the F key again, and in the fast menu I'm going to choose Solidify. And so now you can see as I pull this up, we start to get this line, which is now way too thick. But you get the idea of, you know, we can basically make this line as thick or as thin as we would like. Before we get too much further though, I want to change the weighting on this by hitting the W key, and I want to switch it to negative. So this way it's building this line inside of that boundary that we drew. And we can type a number in for the thickness if we want something exact, right? So if I type 150, that's 0.15 of a millimeter, which if you're familiar with like common practice for scribing, if you're adding custom scribed panel lines to a 1/144th scale kit, most people will use a 0.15 millimeter scribing tool to do those lines. So we can, with this thickness of 150, approximate that, or actually get exactly that thickness of a line. So this we will be cutting out of here to make the panel line that we want. And let's actually go ahead and do that now. So I have this object selected, I shift select the other object, I open my fast menu and I choose difference, right? And that's what we've always done before. So I'm gonna do that, and you'll probably cringe a little because it gets a little weird here, but don't worry, we'll fix it. I'm gonna hit H to hide the wireframe just to get it out of the way. So it's done this weird artifact thing. And the other thing I noticed right away as well is that I want this to be a sharp edge, and it's got the bevel on it. So let's take care of that first, right? If I select this part, we go find the difference modifier that we just created. It's this one. I can tell because I can turn it on and off and see. And we'll pull this again down below the bevel. So that way we get a sharp edge. We still have these weird artifacts. So what's going on there? Well, by default, if we could look back at this difference modifier that got added here and we twirl this down to see all of its details, by default when ND creates a difference modifier in Blender, it uses the fast solver, and most of the time that works just fine. But sometimes, especially if you have an outline shape like we have here, or a shape that intersects on itself, then the fast solver gets very confused and you end up with these kinds of weird artifacts. And so to fix that, what you want to do is you want to switch to the exact solver. So I'm going to do that now, and now it's even worse. And the reason for that is that the exact solver has some additional parameters. So we can twirl this one down under solver options, and we can see the other things that we can turn on for the exact solver. And most of the time, if this happens to you, you can click this self intersection option and everything will work just fine. Sometimes you also need hole tolerant. In our case, we don't in this case, but it's because we drew this box that comes back and starts where it ended, or ends where it started. That's what I meant. That we have to have this self intersection option turned on. So now with that, we have now, basically cut out this nice panel line. Now down here at the bottom, it doesn't do what we want yet, right? Because we didn't extend it over that way. So we'll take care of that in just a minute, but this is looking pretty good right now. And the way that I want to take care of this area where it wraps around the corner down here is just by actually copying that object that we've already created and turning it and putting it in the right spot down there. So to do that, what I'm going to do is use our cycle trick again. So I'm going to cycle through these with my mouse wheel until I find the object I want, which is this one. And I'm going to click to select that one. And then I'm going to Shift D and duplicate it. So I now have a copy of this. I'm going to right click so that it drops it right back where, so right click basically cancels the move. Anytime you duplicate an object, Blender puts it into move mode. If you right click right away, it'll cancel the move and drop that object right back where it was. So we've got two copies of that thing sitting on top of each other now, and our new copy is the one that's selected. So if I hit R for rotate and I want to rotate it around the Y axis, I believe, yeah, that's correct. And I want to rotate it 90 degrees. Now I've got it turned that way. I'm going to hit enter, and then looking straight from the side here, I suppose, we can move it on the Z axis downward, right? And we want to move it to right about there. And then we can move it, I'll do this one this way. We can move it on the X axis this way to maybe somewhere right about there, right? So this will be the rest of our cut. And because we copied this object and we never moved it on the Y axis, it'll be perfectly lined up with the cut that we already have. And so now that we have that, and we can shift select this guy, we can then do that same difference. And it will get confused again, but don't worry, it's fine. So we can go back and find our original object, which I think is this one right here. And we'll twirl this one down. So this is our new difference modifier. We can tell because if we turn it off, everything looks okay. And we turn it back on, everything gets crazy. So once again, we're gonna drag it to the bottom of the stack so it's after the bevel modifier. And then we're gonna have to toggle this down, and we're gonna have to switch to exact mode instead of fast. And now it looks like it's worked okay. We actually didn't have to turn on the self-intersection solver option this time. If we do, it won't break anything. But we don't have to, it doesn't look like. So those are a little bit, how they work is a little strange, a little mysterious, but all I can say is if you're having trouble with your difference modifiers especially, go switch the solver from fast to exact and then try toggling these two options on and off, and you'll probably find a variation that works for you. And the exact one that you're gonna need is, I can't always guess what it's gonna be. So we'll select that and hide it to get it out of the way, and now we have this nice little access panel that has a nice outline there. I think that looks good. Let's add some sort of a rectangular little hatch here that might be like what you use to open the panel or something like that. Let's do that by shift right clicking to move our 3D cursor into that corner. It's a little hard to see exactly where I want to be. Somewhere like that is probably fine. We'll create a single vertex, we'll extrude it in the Y direction over this way, about like that. We'll extrude it in the Z direction down this way, about like that. Extrude it again in the Y. I will use my hold down control trick to line that up there. And then I will hit F and do make manifold to fill that in. So now we have this rectangle here. We'll tab out of edit mode, we'll hit F and solidify. So this is all stuff we've done before. Maybe it's getting a little repetitive right now, but if you repeat these things over and over, that's how you get to be quick and efficient with them for sure. So we have that now, and we'll shift select this and we'll do a difference to cut it out. One more time, we've got our bevel modifier happening after that. So I'm gonna pull this down to the bottom so that it gets a sharp edge instead. That's pretty good. Let's hide this wireframe if I can select it. There we go. Yeah, you know what? This squared off look isn't quite what I'm after. So I'm going to cycle. I'm going to find that cutter object. There it is. click to select it. And I'm actually going to, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tab into edit mode so we can see the 4 vertices that define the rectangular shape that we originally drew. I'm going to use the ND fast menu to do a vertex bevel on those edges. So if I drag my mouse, you'll see I'm actually creating a bevel there. That's, again, not exactly the look I'm going for. I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to roll the mouse wheel up to add segments. And I'm going to make this a rounded thing. So we'll go about 8 segments is good. And then I'll drag this over to kind of make a rounded pill shape. That seems good. Tab back out of that and hit H to hide it. And then we have that sort of an opening, which I like a lot better. Yeah. So we'll go with that. And actually, now that I see that, I kind of want that back over here on this other area that we just did a little while ago. So this little rectangle here, why don't we make that one also the same? So I'm going to use my cycle trick. I'm going to select that guy, tab in, make sure those vertices are selected, and do a vertex bevel there as well. I'm going to go Alt, 8 segments again, pull this in like so, click to confirm, tab and hide, and that is pretty good. So now we have that sort of same design idea happening in a couple different places, which is nice, I think. All right, so one more thing. Is this video long enough yet? This is the last thing, I promise. I want to, up here at this corner and down here at this corner, I want to add some sort of a little detail. And I think the way that I want to do that, let's look at it straight from the side again and zoom in a bit. I think what I'm going to do is just add a cube and then cut out an area here. So I'm going to hold down Shift and right click again to drop our 3D cursor. I'm just trying to eyeball it so it's centered horizontally between, you know, along this edge. That's fairly close. And then hit the F menu and add a cube. And there's our cube. And I think it needs to be a little bit bigger than that. So I'm going to scale that cube up like this. I want to make sure I leave myself enough of an edge there from that bevel over. I think that'll be fine. Yeah. And then I'm going to shift select our main part. And I'm going to go into the fast menu. And this time I'm going to do a slice. So what this is going to do is going to take the outline of that cube and use it to slice the piece that we have selected second there. And so I will choose slice. It took just a second to think about it. And I will hide the wireframe here with H. But what it's done is it's created a slice. And because that slice happens before the bevel, we get this nice little beveled edge around both sides of the slice. So that's kind of cool. And it also creates this other little part that we can select and manipulate. And so what I would like to do is move this along the x-axis in this way a little bit. And I would also like to move it on the z-axis down this way a little bit. I want to move it in along x more and down along z a little bit less. So I'm going to actually move it back out just a touch like this. So we have something kind of like that. Yeah, I like that. Just as a detail there. And I want to add the same thing up there. And so let's just copy that cube. That way we're sure that it's the same size. So again, we're going to do our cycle trick. I'm going to cycle through until I find the cube. I'm going to click. Yeah, I'm going to Shift D to duplicate it. And then I'm just going to right click to drop the duplicate right back there. I'm going to look straight from the top because I think that's going to be the easiest way to line this up. And I'm going to move that thing up this way. So we're going to drop this right about there. That seem right? Yeah, that seems right. Zoom into it. Look at it like this. Select this, hit our fast menu and do a slice again. And hit H to hide that wireframe. Now we have this piece, which we can again move along the x-axis in this way a bit. Move along the z-axis down this way a bit. Now again, I'm just eyeballing these and making them about the same as what I did down on the other corner. If you wanted to be perfectly precise, you could be typing in numbers here. And that way you'd be sure that they were exactly identical. But just looking at them, they look fairly close to me. So that's where we are. and I think I'm happy with this. I wanted to leave these areas here just plain. Again, not adding extra detail just for decoration's sake, trying to make things that seem like they're a functional part of the piece. And you also don't want detail everywhere, because that just becomes too much of a jumbled mess for eyes to look at. You want to have some areas with a lot of detail like we have here, and then a few little edges and things like that. And then obviously your eyes drawn to this main area here where the insignia is, because it's kind of there by itself and there's a lot of open space that doesn't have detail around it. So I think that works well. And yeah, I'm happy with this piece the way it's turned out. So what I'm going to do is go and export this and drop it in my slicer and send it over to my 3D printer. And I'll print this out and we'll come back and take a look at what the final printed piece looks like as soon as it's done printing. I'll see you then. All right, so here we go, the moment of truth. I've printed this thing out. Here we have the shield that we're fitting the part onto. We have the original version of the printed part without any of the details. And here is our final piece. I've printed it. I've actually added a very light coat of primer just so that it can kind of pull out the details a little bit and we can see how it looks. I'll get you a closer view here of this one. So yeah, we've got our insignia plate up here with our logo and those bolts in the corners. Those came out quite nice. We've got these little details here on these edges. And then we've got this area right here with all of our little cylindrical details. All of these little notches and like this rounded little cutout that we created, all of those turned out pretty good. They show up pretty well. With a little bit of panel line fluid in here, this would really pop for sure. I'm sure it still fits on here because we haven't changed the geometry of it at all. So that's kind of what it's going to look like on our final shield part. And yeah, I'm happy with how this turned out. You can let me know in the comments if you have thoughts or if you would have changed anything on you know, if you were to create this part with different ideas, different designs, that sort of stuff. Yeah, let me know your thoughts on that. The other thought that I just had as well as I was getting this out of the 3D printer and preparing it to show you guys here on the video. If you want, if you're interested in seeing how I use the export function from Blender to create the STL file and how I set things up in the slicer with supports and stuff like that for 3D printing, let me know in the comments below as well on that. That's probably a little bit outside the scope of what I have in mind for this particular video series, but I'm certainly not against creating some additional videos on the channel that aren't part of the Blender Gunpla series that talk about how I do you know, slicing and supporting and stuff like that for these 3D prints to make them come out nice and to have minimal amount of cleanup needed as far as sanding and stuff like that once we're done. So yeah, let me know if you're interested in that. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a good day and I will see you next time. I'm not sure what we're going to cover in the next episode. You'll have to wait and tune in to find out. I do have that long list of suggestions that have come from some of you guys, so I'll look through that and try to prioritize and figure out what we'll do next. And yeah, I'll see you then. Until then, have a good one and go make something awesome.